Greetings, my fellow freedom lovers and sovereign thinkers. Thank you for tuning in to the LL3 podcast. My name is Craig, transmitting from the beautiful swampy mangroves of South Florida. And today's date is Saturday, January 4th, 2013. Yeah, Saturday morning, early Saturday morning to be exact. And this came from a show, tribute band, in the end, which is a Linkin Park tribute band, and they had another band called Audio Echo. They do Soundgarden, Audio Slave, Temple of the Dog. It was alright, but it was a fun little show. Nice little crowd. Some interesting controversies about the death of the vocalist. I know they say he had mental health issues, committed suicide, but other reports claim he was murdered. Was him and Chris Cornell was going to expose and reveal the pedophile rings in Los Angeles area and other parts of the country. So some claims. I read some articles on it. I think I did a show on it years ago. We don't know how deep does it go. The rabbit hole goes for sure. Interesting. I had a little comment. Disagree with me because I posted something in reference to Virginia, the Article 1, the Commonwealth Bill of Rights, the law is the supreme doctrine. And the guy goes, wrong, fact, no. The U.S. Constitution is the supreme law and everything else is void. I'm like thinking, man, just gotta don't talk to me like Warden Cleaver. I'm not condemning the guy, but that's the first thing I had in my mind, just bust out laughing. Big habit people have, even myself in the past, use the U.S. Constitution as a corporate doctrine. It'd be very dangerous because certain things, the federal government is only good for the focus on the federal government, but not the states. Okay. However, with the Bill of Rights, the thing of the U.S. Constitution, you use Bill of Attainder ex post facto law. The reason why I said Article 1 or the Commonwealth Bill of Rights, the supreme law, because it has a lot more detail and clarification. I guess that person never heard my show, so when I come to state issues and so forth, I try not to use the U.S. Constitution. It's like self-explanatory, but people don't even know the states or commonwealths Constitution, including the Declaration or Bill of Rights. And folks need to start looking at that as well. But no condemnation, I just bust out laughing. Oh, good grief. So, if you want to have a little discussion, that's fine. I could have a little chit chat with them on that. Nothing really, nothing to be bitter about. I'm not saying he is either. I just find that like sometimes when people correspond with you via text or social media or type it in, you don't know how their emotions are. Maybe a little bit different, but that's very interesting. I just get a big kick out of it at times. It's like, I'm Wally Cleaver. I don't have a clue. Even though Eddie Haskell's a pain in my ass, still my best friend. That's the mindset I have. But the truth of the matter is, I'm not offended. So, everyone's talking about the decision, what President Trump did, in reference to what's going on in Baghdad with the embassy. There's uprises and surges, and they claimed Iran was involved. The people in Iraq don't want the troops in the United States troops there anymore. So it's like very imperialistic. So he made a claim he took out one of the generals from Iran. Claimed to be, he may be doing be one of the main men behind it. And I'm not praising these individuals either. I'm not lovey-dovey when it comes to government. People that know that already, but the first time listeners, just to let you know, I'm not lovey-dovey with government in general. However, when it comes to imperialism or using the War Powers Act, have the president give all the authority, which Congress gave it to him. You can thank your Congress for that. The same knuckleheads that voted for the invading Iraq and used the War Powers Act in that one as well, which wasn't really constitutionally declared. But they should vote for the idiots. They all hate Bush, but they want to support James Kerry. at that time in 2004 to be a great president, supposedly. I laugh because he voted for it. Oh, well. But a lot of presidents have been doing that for years, regardless if they're Democrat or Republican. So I just read a lot. I heard even Charlie Bernardi talked about it. And then some political bobbleheads that they brought, which is, oh, he attacked that Iran or the general with that drone attack was distracting from the impeachment hearings. And I told people it's done by a bill of attainder, House Resolution 660. So it's illegal impeachment, period. However, they may not go after him on this because a lot of clowns that hate him love war, love making money off that. And they go, oh, but Israel's our ally. So, foreign entanglements. Washington warned us about that. So, even Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was critical of it, which I'm not crazy about her, but doesn't mean she's always, I won't disagree with her on everything. And decide to say, oh, we got to use the war powers resolution. And I had to send her a little clarification. Correction, Article 1, Section 8, and Clause, I think I said Clause 1, but it should have been Clause 11. I may have used that. The Congress power to declare war. So I'm going to be talking about that. I'm going to do one more thing on there as well, right after it. So, let's just start it off, my friends. Which from the history.house.gov. His Institute, right? Yeah. Yeah, the History, Art, and Archives, United States House of Representatives. This also is a historical thing here. Let's just read what he has to say. Let me see something here. I'm just gonna... No, it's okay. Let's just go back here. Okay, cool. So this reads here, power to declare war. And it says here, Congress shall have the power to provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. That's U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. And that's what it says here. Congress shall have the power to declare war, grant letters of marque and reprisal, and make rules conquering captures on land and water. To raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years. Yeah, they broke that one, right? To provide and maintain a navy, to make rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces, to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasion. To provide organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states respectively the appointment of the officers and the authority of training the militia according to discipline prescribed by Congress. U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 11 through 16. And it was funny because you got some people in the House who want to do tougher firearm laws, or get rid of certain firearms. So are they anti-militia? Good question, right? Origins. Like many powers articulated in the U.S. Constitution, Congress's authority to declare war was revolutionary in its design and a clear break from the past when a handful of European monarchs controlled the continent's affairs. The framers of the Constitution, reluctant to concentrate too much influence in the hands of too few, deny the office of the president the authority to go to war unilaterally. If America was going to survive as a republic, they reasoned declarations of war required careful debate in open forums among public representatives. The provision of the Constitution giving war-making powers to Congress was dictated, as I understand it, by the following reasons. A young first-term congressman named Abraham Lincoln wrote in 1848 during America's war with Mexico. He says here, kings has always been involving and impoverishing their people in wars, pretending generally, if not always, that the good of the people was the object. This our Constitutional Convention understood to be the most oppressive of all kingly oppressions, and they resolved to so frame the Constitution that no one man should hold power of bringing this oppression upon us. He was right at the time, but contradicted himself as president. Do a little homework. The Real Lincoln by Thomas J. DiLorenzo is a good source book. It has a lot of facts to back it up. And you could even talk about the debates that and the war between the Confederate States of America, what they call it the Civil War, was unilaterally declared. So I will continue on here. Constitutional framing. James Madison was an integral part of the constitutional framing of the House. Initially, delegates of the Constitutional Convention discussed America's war powers in general terms, briefly mentioning the common defense, security of liberty, and the general welfare of the country's citizens. Then, in early June 1787, Charles Pinckney of South Carolina argued for a vigorous executive reopening the war powers issue, but to give the office war-making powers would turn the president into an elected monarch. Pinckney argued. Other delegates, including John Rutledge of South Carolina, James Wilson of Pennsylvania, and James Madison of Virginia, agreed, concluding that the powers of war and peace were best reserved for the national legislature. By August, the framers had yet to decide where to vest the country's war powers. Pierce Butler of South Carolina favored the executive office as best suited to make war, but there was a growing sense that such monumental responsibility belonging with the legislative branch. Not everyone was convinced that the House and Senate should share the power. However, and Pinckney felt that since the Senate already had jurisdiction over treaties, it alone should have the discretion to decide matters as well. Okay. Madison and Jerry of Massachusetts sought a middle ground. For Jerry, giving a single office the entirety of the country's war powers contradicted the goals of a republic, and he and Madison proposed a quick edit, replacing make with declare, so that the Constitution would read, Congress shall have the power to declare war. The change codified congressional authority, but made the clause flexible enough to enable the president to defend the country during emergencies. Okay, so interesting that with that. Delegates worried that Congress would be out of session, would act too slowly if foreign forces invaded America. So despite their resolve of dilute executive power, they gave the office an implied authority to make war as an insurance policy of sorts for America's security. Like George Mason of Virginia, the founders felt that war should be difficult to enter, and they expect a congressional debate to restrain the war-making process. On August 17, 1787, the state delegations agreed to strike, make, and insert declare by a vote of 8-1. Initially, it had been 7-2, but Connecticut switched to its position. In doing so, committed the war powers of Congress. The Constitution supposes what the history of all governments demonstrates. Madison write to Thomas Jefferson a few years later, and the executive is the branch of power most interested in war and most prone to it. It has accordingly its studied care vested the question of war in the legislature. Constitutional issues. On the Constitution, many checks and balances, few have become as controversial as the consequential in the country's war powers. Article 1 is clear in giving Congress the power to declare war and to federalize state militias. But Article 2, Section 2 names the President the Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states when called into actual service of the United States. Although the framers ensured that a civilian would lead America's armed forces, constitutional scholars have debated for years whether the position of Commander-in-Chief actually gives the President authority to open hostilities or whether it was merely as a title the founders conferred as on the Chief Magistrate. When combined with the President's implied privilege to make war, the question of whether the Commander-in-Chief carries additional power becomes an issue of vast constitutional consequence, something that plagued the federal system and its scholars over time. While a close reading of the convention debate suggests that the framers intended to limit presidents to defensive actions, a number of administrations, especially after World War II, have broadly interpreted the notion of a defensive war and have never committed the U.S. armed forces without congressional authority, only to ask for it later, if they ask for it at all. One recent study has described the Constitution's language on initiating hostilities as ambiguous, and more than one scholar has described the executive power as vague. In summarizing the relationship between 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue and Capitol Hill, another political scientist has written recently that the Constitution is a paradoxical mix of clearly defined war powers for Congress and implied prerogatives for the President, which over the years create an uneasy balance between the branches. For most of U.S. history, the Constitution's checks and balances worked. And more often than not, presidents sought the consent of Congress on war matters. The period following World War II, however, saw the president's war-making discretion reach a level that made many legislators nervous. By the early 1970s, the relationship between the legislative and executive branches reached something of a tipping point. On the onset of the Cold War, combined with America's international obligations as a member of the United Nations and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, stretched the executive branch's foreign policy footprint to corners of the world that the framers of the Constitution could never have imagined. In the summer of 1950, for instance, President ordered an American response to North Korea's attack on South Korea and later committed ground forces in Korea after the UN Security Council asked for help. And after consecutive administrations committed America's military to combat operations in the Dominican Republic, Laos, and Vietnam without formally declaring war. Congress's mood soured to the point that it passed the War Powers Resolution in November 1973. As is stated in the legislation, Congress drafted the War Powers Resolution to fulfill intent of the framers of the Constitution of the United States and ensure that a collective judgment of both Congress and the President will apply to the introduction of America's armed force into hostilities. Since its enactment, however, the War Powers Resolution has had scant, if any, effect on the military. Decisions on sitting presidents. In fact, many administrations have simply refused to recognize this constitutionality. According to two political scientists who study Congress's ability to influence the White House on war matters. Interesting there. So they gave the president more power during a period of time, and actually originally started in 1941. Then it went further and further and further, and it got too obvious. And this is right here is declarations of war and the authorizations for the use of military force. Since 1789, Congress declared 11 times against 10 countries during 5 separate conflicts. Great Britain in 1812, War of 1812. Mexico, 1846, War with Mexico. Spain, 1898, Spanish-American War, also known as the War of 1898. Germany, 1917, World War I. Austria-Hungary, 1917, World War I. Japan, 1941, during World War II. Germany, 1941, World War II. Of course, Italy, same thing. Bulgaria, 1942, World War II. Hungary, 1942, World War II. And Romania, same thing. So I'll have to repeat myself. In each of these 11 instances, the President appealed to Congress for authorization, either in person, before a joint session, or in a written request. For far more common, especially in the modern era, they have congressional authorizations for the use of the military force, or AUMF. Abroad, historically, AUMFs have been much narrower in scope and much more limited than formal declarations of war, such as when Congress gave the President clearance to protect American ships against French aggression in 1789 and against Tripoli's navy in 1802, which was considered the Barbary pirates during that time. The United States' first war on terror. You should look that up. There's books on that too. Very good stuff. And William Eaton led the Marines with some hired mercenaries from Saudi Arabia and Turkey as well during that time. They got the land, the Navy got the sea. So we'll go as I continue on here. After World War II, however, AUMFs became much broader, often granting presidents sweeping authority to engage America's military around the world. Take, for example, the Tonkin Gulf Resolution of 1964, as communist forces in Vietnam took increasingly militaristic actions against U.S. forces. Well, it's been proved to be a false flag. It has been declassified, by the way. Look it up. Congress authorized the President in sweeping but vague language to promote the maintenance of international peace and security in Southeast Asia. That was during the Johnson administration, by the way. In fact, despite engaging in conflicts in places like Vietnam and Iraq over the last 70 years, Congress has not declared war since 1942. Rather, the individual congressional AUMFs have been interpreted as fully empowered the President to prosecute the wars, according to law professors Curtis A. Bradley and Jack L. Goldsmith. Although the concept of the AUMF has existed since the start of the Republic, the specific use of the term became a commonplace in the 1990s during the Gulf War. The House's role. For most of the modern era, the House has acted quickly once presidents have requested formal declarations of war. Traditionally, the House Committee on Foreign Affairs has considered bills sending American troops to fight abroad, at least in one instance in 1924. The House has pulled legislation tending to promote peace and discourage war from the Judiciary Committee and is referred to the Committee of Military Affairs. Beginning with World War II, all declarations of war have become before Congress as joint resolutions, and in each instance the House suspended the rules in order to quickly pass the measure. Decision to send the nation to war is perhaps Congress's gravest responsibility, and in the House, war votes can be seldom, weighty occasions. For members to declare war against a foreign power is to send their constituents, their neighbors, their family, and even themselves into harm's way. One day after Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, early December 1941, that's the 7th, by the way, President Franklin Roosevelt addressed a joint session of Congress, laying out his cause for war. When the House gathered immediately afterward to discuss Roosevelt's request, Jeanette Rankin of Montana reportedly sought recognition to address the chamber. 24 years earlier, Rankin had voted against America's entry into World War I, and on the eve of World War II, even as the war resolution against Japan went through its first reading. Speaker Sam Rayburn of Texas, who witnessed Rankin's previous vote in 1917, refused to recognize her. As members prepared for the final vote, many approached Rankin, hoping to convince her to vote for the war. At the very least, they hoped she would vote present or abstain altogether. When the reading clerk reached her name during the roll call on the resolution's final passage, Rackin voted no, only one vote against. The bill passed 388 to 1. As a woman, I can't go to war, she said, and I refuse to send anyone else. After the chamber erupted in protest to her vote, Rackin waited in a phone booth before the Capitol Police escorted her back to her office. She may know some stuff that they didn't want to talk about, because it's interesting. There's a lot of history in there. A thing called cause and effect, and one of the final straws was sanctions, trade wars. The United States decided to do sanctions on Japan, including oil especially oil, and that was a quick reaction. It was funny about that because even there's been some documents stating that Franklin Roosevelt had knowledge about Japan was going to attack, and they did. It took certain communication equipment out of there. So it's interesting with that. Just look up Pearl Harbor's an inside job, and you make your own judgment. With one exception, early on, votes to declare war in the House tended to pass with overwhelming majorities. Declaring war or passing an AUMF, however, is one of the first steps. Once fighting begins, Congress assumes another constitutional role, that of oversight. And they give you a whole list about the history of the wars, and you could look it up for yourselves. So you definitely check it out. It tells you how many people who voted and all that. So of course the only thing they did a voice vote was the War of 1898, or the Spanish-American War, on April 25th, 1898, excuse me. And most of them, maybe one against, but the most was the War of 1812 with Britain on June 4th. It was 79-49. Of course, the War in Mexico, that was dated May 11th, 1846, 174-14. And you could just look at it the rest of the way down. I will post this on my footnotes, and there's plenty of other reading material to check out as well on the sources, so you can enhance yourselves. The whole thing is, my friends, both sides, doesn't matter who they are, Democrat, Republican, has a habit of making unilateral decisions. Okay, so if you gotta get one, you gotta get them all. No excuses. Because I remember the time when people said the war in Iraq was a lie. We got impeached Bush and Cheney. Everyone went up in the streets and protest. But when Obama did it, and Hillary Clinton was supposed to be the mastermind, supposedly, a lot of us knew that he was Barack Obama. A lot of us called him a stew pigeon, or a bellboy, or a puppet, or a pawn. When they did that, no one protested. So there's a lot of double standards. This is why I always say Congress has I still support Congress has the power to declare war, unless we're being invaded, and there are exceptions. So they made it fair. Okay, they made it fair on that area, but now it hasn't been honored for a long time, and that has to stop. That's why Alexander Ocasio-Cortez was against it, highly critical about it. But instead of using the War Powers Resolution 1973, go to your Constitution, Article 1, Section 8. Self-explanatory. And I sent that to her without mocking anyone on this matter. So I'll be pretty fair. There's other times when people are too obvious, I call them out on their game. So I'll be very fair. But hey, stick to your Constitution. Everyone in here has a duty to let these folks know, including call out the president. Call out President Trump, regardless if you voted for him or not, and tell him I find your actions unacceptable. But we all know one thing: the neocons climaxed on that, especially John Bolton. Masturbating to the Zionist war gods, right? All right, so enough of that. We're gonna do one more here, folks. And I found this one very interesting. And it actually came out on New Year's Eve, believe it or not, from Alt Market, AUT-market.com. Lou Rockwell, he posted on his site, and I read it. A friend of mine from Facebook shared that, so I read it. I'm like, cool, I like it. This one here is entitled "The Leftist Cult versus the Trump Cult: Similarities and Differences." What Brad Smith had to say. Political demagoguery is a valuable and effective weapon in the arsenal of the establishment elites. As long as there is a wide ideological division between groups in society, bases and desire can be tapped and manipulated. This allows those in power to direct vast proportions of the public down one path or another, when a fear of the enemy and the drive to win become more important than the truth and evidence. The population has tied its own puppet strings and handed them over to the spin doctors. This is why the false left-right paradigm has been so useful to the establishment for so long. Anytime the public starts to wake up to the web of control, all the elites have to do is push one or both sides of the political spectrum towards extremism and let the people rage at each other instead of picking up their torches and pitchforks and tearing down the oligarchy. This method of division and diversion keeps masses occupied and feeling as though they are accomplishing something while actually accomplishing nothing. As Carol Quigley, globalist insider and mentor to Bill Clinton, admitted it in his book Tragedy and Hope. As it reads here, the argument that the two parties should represent opposed ideas and policies, one perhaps of the right and the other of the left, is a foolish idea acceptable only to doctrinaire and academic thinkers. Instead, the two parties should be almost identical, so that the American people can throw the rascals out at any election without leading to any profound or extensive shifts in policy. Then it should be possible to replace it every 4 years, if necessary, by the other party, which will be done of these things, but will still pursue with new vigor approximately the same basic policies. Unquote. So what he's saying, the more things change, the more it stays the same. Ain't that obvious, folks? All you gotta do is pay attention thoroughly. Don't rely on the mainstream garbage media, for goodness sakes. The left-right tactic has become more and more exposed in the past decade to the wider public, and so the elites had to change their methods to adapt the growing awareness. Conservatives in particular have started to leave the plantation, and something had to be done to drag them back. The liberty movement has become a force in Western life with tens of millions of members, as an unpredictable element that the establishment needs to lock down and redirect if they ever hope to achieve their goal of a new world order. The elites have used two strategies in this effort. First, they push leftist indoctrination towards full-bore cultism. Second, they have attempted to co-opt the leadership of conservatives in the liberty movement using political public figure in order to bottleneck our energy and momentum. Leftist culture has become increasingly erratic and unhinged, even more so than usual, informed by elements of a new social justice fanaticism, a kind of religious fervor where faith and ideological gatekeepers is more important than facts. The majority of the left, while not necessarily part of this woke religion, is still influenced by SGW rhetoric, delusion notions of patriarchy. Yeah, there you go. Patriarchy, okay. And inherent racism and inherent sexism are woven into the Democrat mindset today. white supremacy. Exactly, folks. They want to call you race because they have no merit. That goes from the other side as well. They see oppression everywhere, and victim group status has become the social currency they use to assimilate to a fantasy world where big government and entitlements are the solutions to all the world's ills. The conservative side of civilization doesn't participate in the oppression fantasy on the left. We don't even speak the same language, as the left's very vocabulary has shifted into an academic babble language they simply made up to describe social dynamics that don't exist, and gender politics that are biologically and scientifically absurd. Reconciling with leftists in any meaningful way has become nearly impossible, and fear of their fanaticism is causing conservatives to assume that whether these people hate must be good. Either Donald Trump, a kind of artificially created focal point machine, a figure that is designed to absorb liberty movement talking points and then regurgitate them in an alphabet soup puddle on Twitter. This rhetoric is relatively effective in that many conservatives recognize parts of the soup and find comfort that Trump must be on their side. Ooh, sorry about that. Must be on their side. I have outlined in numerous articles Trump's dubious background and behavior. To summarize, we often hear lip service from Trump on anti-globalism and anti-elitism, even though it's an undeniable fact that he has saturated his cabinet with globalists and elitists. We heard anti-banker talking points from Trump during the campaign, even though Trump has a long-standing relationship to the Rothschild family and works side by side with Rothschild and Goldman Sachs bankers in the White House. Hey, Barack Obama was a Goldman Sachs man, and of course Mitt Romney. Senator Mitt Romney now. Remember, he ran for president. I call it the Battle of the Goldman Sachs Twins. That was in 2012 to be exact. We heard lots of anti-Federal Reserve discussion from Trump and observation that the current economy is an explosive bubble, engineered by them, yet he now openly demands that the Fed inflate the bubble further while he takes full credit for the fake stock market rally. We also heard many promises that U.S. troops would be coming home and end the long wars in the Middle East would end for America, and that has not happen and likely will not happen as tensions with Iran continue to grow. Yeah, remember Barack Obama said the same thing. God bless the neocons, right? In other words, Trump is a skin job, a robot, a false conservative and false prophet of the liberty movement. He tells us what he wants to hear while his actions said something entirely different. Yet a lot of conservatives still listen to him because they despite the collectivist religion of the left. They just want mainstream recognition and representation, and because they want to believe that there is a white knight out there in Washington defending their interest and their future. The establishment understands these desires and exploits them. They understand that the more extreme the left becomes, the more tempted conservatives will be jump blindly on the Trump bandwagon. Of course, jumping ships, yeah, it happens all the time. Mainstream media outlets like CNN have taken to referring to Trump's base as a cult recently, which of course is the pot calling the kettle black. But it does not mean that the accusation is wrong. Trump base is indeed acting more and more like a cult, but primarily in reaction to the cultism of leftists. The crazier the left gets, the more Trump becomes a folk hero to the right. The more the media promotes fabricated Russiagate nonsense or Ukrainian conspiracy narratives, the more conservatives assume that the establishment is trying to take down Trump. It is rather rudimentary, reverse psychology. If the establishment media attacks Trump, then he must be anti-establishment. If the leftists hate Trump, then he must be good for conservatives. Nothing could be further from the truth. But if anyone points this out, they will be immediately attacked as disinformation agents and purveyors of the CNN talking points. A common argument in defiance of Trump is to ignore his associations and behavior entirely and focus on the prevailing circus surrounding him. Instead, people stated indignantly that, quote, Trump is under attack. They are trying to impeach him. How can he be working with the globalists if they are trying to get rid of him? Unquote. I would point out that there is a usefulness of political theater that goes far beyond trying to remove a president from office. Again, the media viciously attacked Trump during his election campaign. But if one understands that public trust in the mainstream media has collapsed in the past 10 years, then also understands that media attacks on Trump will only cause more people to like him and vote for him. The question then needs to be asked, does the establishment understand this inverse relationship in public psychology, or do they completely overlook it? I seriously doubt they are overlooking it. If this is the case, then the fourth thing, leftist rage against Trump, while partially real, is also fourth-generation warfare designed to trick conservatives into developing their own cult-like fantasy that Trump is our fearless leader fighting the good fight, even though his presidency is tightly intertwined with global elitists. The impeachment itself come at a time when a large portion of the liberty movement is waking up to the Trump con game and is questioning many of his activities and associations. The establishment has put a lot of effort into creating the Trump versus leftist circus, and they really hate the idea that a number of people are refusing to pick a side. You're welcome. I'm inspired. For them, there is nothing worse than free thinkers who organize their own side separate from the false paradigm. The impeachment, like Russiagate, is not designed to get Trump out of office. It's a Hail Mary attempt to pull liberty-minded conservatives back into the Trump fold, to keep us predictable and under control. It is also designed to keep leftists feeling justified in their insanity. Remember, the crazier the left acts, the more fearful and malleable conservatives become. The establishment likes Trump right where he is, and he will not be going anywhere, at least not until he has completely served his purpose. Whether that will be in the next year or another 4 years is hard to say at this time. Obviously, the elites have to keep their left-right paradigm, left-right sideshow going at full volume until they are done using Trump as a distraction. They will attack him as often as needed to create the illusion that he is anti-establishment, and Trump will continue to play along to please his masters, many of them standing over his shoulder every day in the White House. The leftist cult and the Trump cult are similar in their refusal to accept facts and reality, as well as their ability to double and triple down on delusions. They are consistently debunked. I have witnessed people on the Trump train dismiss every blatant piece of evidence of Trump's collusion with globalists on the basis that he is keeping his enemies close. I have seen them ignore his support for red flag laws, his refusal to pull U.S. forces out of Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Yemen, his hostility towards Iran, his support for totalitarian governments like Saudi Arabia, etc. I'd like to let you folks know one thing. Red flag gun laws, a bill of attainder that violates Article 1, Sections 9 and 10 of the U.S. Constitution. Okay? And I will continue on here. They call it 4D chess and simply move on. I have seen them shrug off endless data showing economic decline and proclaim instead of an economic boom. I have seen them completely absorbed and distracted by the trade war in China while forgetting all about the banking elites that engineer most of the calamity in our society. Yes, China is owned by the globalists as well, my friends. They're not organic. The way this acts because they are afraid, the political left frightens them, they are searching for a hero to save them. They are willing to overlook almost any skeleton in Trump's closet in order to make their fantasy versions on him real. But the leftists are nothing more than a symptom. They are useful idiots, not the source of the disease. And Trump is not the hero conservatives are looking for anyway. In terms of the liberty movement, Trump is irrelevant. He's a footnote. The real work is being done by millions of activists breaking through decades of propaganda and exposing the truth. The difference between the leftist cult and the Trump cult is mostly intent. Leftists double and triple down on their lies because they are infatuated with collective power and they see the truth as an obstacle for the greater good. The Trump cult ignores facts and evidence on Trump because they are hyper-focused on collective defense. Leftists are seeking to micromanage the thoughts and behavior of the world, while conservatives are seeking to solidify enough political protection to ensure they are left alone. The leftist cult wants to burn everything to the ground, erase history, and rebuild the world in their image. I like when they say erase history. Fantastic example. Taking down the Confederate statues. Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, all that. Just to give you an example. Destroying heritage and a culture. That's been used in many multiple groups and heritage people as well. Just to give you guys, that's just an example. And people who are like-minded can understand what I'm talking about. The Trump cult is trying to keep the last structures of American heritage alive. They have simply put their faith in the wrong champion. The sad reality is leftists and conservatives are likely far too alien to each other now to ever come to a diplomatic solution. The division in society is very real. It's division at the top. It's a division at the top. That's kabuki theater. The liberty movement is the key to everything. We are the constant target of the establishment fourth generation propaganda. If we didn't matter, then the elites would not be spending so much time, money, and energy trying to keep us in line. They need us to buy into the theater. Otherwise, we become an unknown element, a third party, a time bomb that could explode unexpectedly on them at any given moment. I gotta say one thing. That was a damn good article by Mr. Smith. That's how you look at it, my friends. Mind control, divide and conquer. The left-right paradigm. Not so impressive, right? Of course. That's one of the reasons why we always have to look at things into a bigger picture. See things a lot deeper. Have us start contemplating for our own well-being. And share that knowledge and information to everyone you know. Everything on its face. Prima facie. These paradigm clowns, I call them, Huey and Dewey. They think their gang's better than theirs, and vice versa. And they can have that mindset: are you with us or against us? Like George W. Bush said that in his State of the Union address: you with us or with the terrorists? And even people like folks from the Emma Gonzalez made that statement from March for Our Lives: you with us or against us? It's like more like Pol Pot's my role model. Children of Khmer Rouge, I call them. Like I said, you have to see things a lot broader than what it is. I know many of the folks out there are doing it, which is fantastic. But don't give up the fight, my friends. Don't. Even what's going on in Virginia. 2. New World Order agenda. We all know that Governor Northam is a hired stooge, got funded by Michael Bloomberg. And Mr. Bloomberg is a member of the Council of Foreign Relations, a globalist hack. Alright? Just an example, my friends. So, keep pushing. Share this information with everybody else. Of course, you're going to have the doubtful Thomases of the world, regardless of paradigm. It's nothing new. But don't surrender. Spread and circulate this to everyone you know. And that's it. I thank everyone for listening. Plus, feel free to download and share it throughout your social media networks. If you have any questions, comments, or you said something interesting you want to check out, whatever you do, please send your correspondence with decorum. I will leave the footnotes of these 2 articles on my Spreaker page. Once again, thank you for your time. Plus, always remember that demoniac resistance is healthy for the soul and can liberate humanity. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Keep on spreading the love, and may your guardian spirits be with you.